This video is a Bootstrap Portfolio website tutorial where we'll create the basic fundamentals of what you'll need inside of a website if you're making your own portfolio, and we're going to use the latest Bootstrap 5 to be able to do this. My name's Adrian and I do videos around design and development, so if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe and we're just going to jump straight into it. We'll start by creating a brand new file called index.html. And in here, I want to place Bootstrap. So what we'll do is we'll jump here into our Bootstrap documentation at v5.getbootstrap.com. And I'm just going to copy over this basic HTML. And this should get us up and running. Let's hit F1 here and open up a live server. And this will load up Bootstrap in a window here for us to start working with to create our portfolio. And what we want to do is create a title here. So I'm just going to call this Bootstrap 5 Portfolio website tutorial. And what we'll do is we'll place my name in here. So Adrian Tuarog as our H1 tag, and we should see that pop up. Now for a portfolio, there's a number of sections we're going to need to have. The very first will obviously be navigation. So let's place in a nav in here with a UL and an LI. Now for Bootstrap, we've got a number of options here for navigation. So let's actually go here and expand them out. Now, I believe they're under components. You can go to navs here, and we've got a couple of different examples. And what I want to be able to do is have a horizontal nav, which is justified at the center. And here's an example of that. What we'll do is we'll create a list item here and pass in the class nav, and we're going to have a justify content of center. So let's do that. Let's add in the class here, and we'll pass in nav and justify center. And in here, we'll have our list of links. The very first link will be maybe home. And the next one over here might be something like portfolio. The one after that we can do as, let me spell that correctly, portfolio. Maybe this one can be contact me. And I think that should be it to start off with. So let's have a look, and we've got our links in there, but they still don't have any styling. So let's take a look at what we're missing here. We do need to pass in the class here, nav item and nav link, and this should apply the styling that we need. So let's jump back in here and pass those in. Let's pass in nav item, and here in the link, we'll pass in nav-link. And I'll just copy this across to our other elements, and that should get us up and running. Let's hit save on that, and we can see they've got the correct spacing now, and they look a lot better. Now, in terms of our navigation, I think that's about it. I don't really want to do anything else, but I do like the idea of having an active state. So what I might do is I might pass in nav_pills, I think it is, and I might pass in an active element in here. So let's pass that into the UL div here, or the UL tag, and let's pass in active over here. I think you do that on the list item, but we'll double check. It might be on the A tag itself. So let's pass that in there, and we can see that we've got that active state. Now my name there, it doesn't seem to be fitting in very well. What I'd really like to do is to put it inside of a container. So I'm just going to put it here inside of a container. And the other thing I want to be able to do is to center it. So in order to do that, we'll jump here into the topography, and let's have a look at what different options we have here. So here we've got an example of how we can do different types of display text. And we can do a number of different things here. So for example, I'd like to have some lead text in here. And I can pass in a p tag with the class lead to be able to do that. So I'm going to just do that over here. Let's pass in a tag called lead. Sorry, a p tag with the class lead. And here I'm going to say enjoys development. And let me spell that correctly, development and design. Maybe something like programming, front end and back end, as well as UI and UX. So we'll hit save on that, and let's take a look at our example. We can see that we've got our lead item here. However, I still need this to be text centered, so I might just pass in text center here. as a class, and I think that should apply. Now, Bootstrap 5 has some new items in here. One of them is the margin. So I'm going to do a margin on the y-axis of maybe 3 units. We'll apply that and we see we have a bit of margin there, but it's not enough. So I'm going to increase that to 5 units. And that's looking a little bit better. So I've got my name, I've got what I enjoy, and I've got my details in here for the links. Now I might add in 1 or 2 more links because it doesn't feel like it's quite enough yet. And this nav in here, I might also put inside of a container so that it's correctly spaced. And that should look a little bit better. And here as my next link, I might put in something like skills. And I might write a little bit more about that, or about me. That might be better. So now we've got a few more links, and that's looking pretty good. Now what I'd like to do is put in an introduction of work history. So I'm going to create a new section in here. And for this section, it's going to be container, but I'm going to break it down into 2 rows. So let's pass in row here, and we'll have the 2 columns, sorry. For the first column, what I'm going to do maybe in here is pass in a H3 element with work experience. And for work experience, this is where I can state out a couple of my previous jobs. We'll do 1 more column in here. And in this one, we might call this skills and interests, or maybe just skills in general. So let's hit save on that. We've got our 2 columns in there. Now, since we're centering everything, it does look a little bit odd. What we might do is we might remove that centering. So I'm going to remove it from our nav, and I'm going to remove it here from our title. I'm going to hit save on that. We'll align everything to the left. We also want a bit of margin here. So I'm going to do MT5, which is margin top 5 on our container here before our 2 elements, and we should have a bit more spacing there. That looks a little bit better, and now we can actually fill this out with some content. So the very first thing I might want to do is pass in a H4 element with my most recent job. So in this case, it's Moshi Marketing. And we'll pass in a few things in here. I'm going to create a strong tag, and in here I'm going to put in maybe 2017 to current. And let's hit save on that to see what it looks like. We've got our details in here. And in here, I can say something such as front end and back end developer doing a number of projects using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That can be our small description there. The actual tag here for our strong tag, I'm going to wrap that in a div so that we can have this break the line. And then we've got our very first item here. Now for this, I still think it needs a little bit of a margin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a class here on work experience, and I'm going to pass in MB3, which is 3 units of margin to the bottom. And I'll apply that to skills as well. So we can see that's applied, and it's got slightly better spacing. Now, the other thing I want to do is after this description, I'm going to pass in a list of items here, of examples of work I've done. So for example, I could say something like developing iOS and Android apps. Let's do a few here. Maybe creating front WordPress websites, and maybe creating Node.js API backend. So that looks good, and we've got our list item there. Bootstrap 5 has some great styling we can do for lists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a list group in here, which will have a couple of lines and better spacing for our content. I'm just going to pass this in as a class over here. And I'm also going to grab this class here for the list item itself called list group item. And we'll apply this to the li tag down here. So let's save that and take a look at our example, and that's looking a little bit better. And I think in this case, in terms of a portfolio, maybe we could even place this with a small card or something like that. So let's have a look at our cards over here. Now, one of the things that we can do with cards is we can add a card with a card body. And this is what I'm thinking of doing. So let's actually do that. I'm going to wrap this entire row here in a card. So let's pass in div card, and let's place this all in there. And then I think we do also have to wrap it in a card-body in terms of the Bootstrap syntax. So I'll paste those both in. We'll hit save. And we can see that looks a little bit better, except for the fact that work experience would probably look a little bit better outside of the card. So I'm going to actually place this H3 element outside of the card, whereas everything else here will be placed inside of the card. And that way, my very first one here can sort of exist on its own, and that looks pretty good. The only thing that I think could do with improvement is maybe the margins here on the left. These items here do have a bit of a margin, whereas these don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap these with an X3, I think, for 3 units of x-axis margin, and that should align them similar to what we have in our list group. And for our list, I'll do MT maybe 2, just to have 2 units of margin there from the top. And that looks much better already. What we can do now is we can copy over this entire card and we can create a new one below it. And this can be our very second item. Now, for this, I'm going to pass in MB3 for 3 units of margin at the bottom to both of these, just so that there's a little bit of breathing room between each one of my working experience examples here on my portfolio. And what I want to do for the second one is pass in my second lot of work. So in this case, it would be Chamber of Commerce, and maybe this would be something like 2013 to 2017. And in here, I might do something like IT support and help desk. It really has nothing to do with web development because this used to be a different career of mine, but it's something different in general. So fixing computers, maybe something like fixing servers and security testing. So let's apply that in there and we should see that come up. So that looks good. Now the skills section will be a little bit more complicated because in terms of skills, we want to be able to add quite a few different things, subclasses, so to speak. So what I'm thinking is maybe we'll use that same sort of a card structure. I'm going to create or copy this card out a little bit, but I'm not going to copy everything out. I'm just going to copy out the title here. We'll copy out the card body and we'll close that tag, and we'll copy out the card itself and close that tag. And in here, I'm going to put front end as a skill. So we should see that just here on the right. Now, what I want to be able to do is create a few list items in here of front end skills. And we had a few examples of different lists we could create earlier, but all of these, they might not look very good. The only one that might look good is this one, but I think that might just not work in this example. So what I'm thinking is maybe doing something unique, or maybe just using the basic styling for our list here. So I think I'll do that. Now, for this styling here, for the HTML, I'm going to pass in, for the actual items itself, I'm going to pass in most of the basic skills we have here. So that's HTML, CSS, and JS. Now, of course, there are other skills that we can pass in here, such as React and maybe Angular, and let's do Ionic. And what else would be considered front end? Maybe I can't really think of any other ones at this time, but I think that should be enough to get us started. So here we've got a list of front end skills. The next thing we can do is create another card in here. And in this case, we can pass in some back end skills. And in this case, I might do something like Node.js, maybe PHP, maybe MySQL. We could also do something like, what else could we do for backend? Maybe Mongo, maybe Express, and maybe something else such as, what's another backend language? I guess just APIs. APIs sounds good. So that's a good example of skills for front end and back end. And that fills out the first part of our portfolio. The next part is maybe more details about some of these skills or some projects in general. So what I'm going to do is we'll collapse out both of these sections over here, and we're going to create a brand new one. So let's create a new container here, and we'll also pass in MT5. And what we're going to do here is maybe we'll do something with a H3 tag called previous projects. So we'll have that just down here below. And what I'm thinking is we can use the card structure we had before to do a few examples of actual work we've done in the past. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create these cards with some columns. So let's create a row here. And this time we'll do a responsive column. So let's do call LG maybe 3. So let's pass that in properly so that its syntax is correct. And in here, I want to do the card with a card dash body. And in this case, we also want a card image. And in this case, we'll actually pass an image tag here at the top. And we also need to set out some of the tags here for our card title and our image and our button. So what I'm thinking here is in our body, let's actually first pass in our image here with a class of card image top. So let's pass that in here. We'll fill this out in a little bit, but before we get there, let's also finish up this syntax here. So we need a card body, a card text, and a button. So over here in our syntax, let's do card title. Was that title? Yes. Card text. And let's say something like medical startup. And this is a specialist directory for accessing resources. Great. And finally, we'll have an image in there. Now, I'm not too sure what I'll set the image as yet, but finally, we do need a width on this card. But since we're doing columns, we're not going to set a width per se because the column will just expand out to fill that out. So let's also make sure that this image here has an alt tag. So I'm going to pass in medical startup in there. Let's also update this card title here just to be a H5 tag. And finally, we'll add in a image URL in here. And what I'm thinking is maybe just passing in picsum.photos, passing in a width of 400 and a height of 200 and hitting save there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a look over here and we can see that our item just exists here below. We do still need to add a button. So I'm just going to pass in button dash primary, and maybe we'll pass in view website. So let's hit save on that. We can see that it's popped up over here. We just need to make sure there is correct spacing in here for the button, because in here, I believe the spacing is a little bit bigger for the card text, and maybe that's because this is a p tag, and in here we added a div. So let's quickly update that, and we should see that update a little bit better, and that's looking much better now. We'll also add in a slight margin here at the bottom. So I'm going to do MB3 maybe. And let's copy this element across a few times and we can do a few different examples. So maybe this one can be VPN AUS, which is a virtual private network. And the final one here maybe can be YouTube channel. And this can be about design and development. Perfect. So let's hit save on that and we should see our content in here. Now, the thing with these are that we've put these in columns, but it seems that I haven't closed this div off properly. So let's make sure we close that off properly so that it wraps. Otherwise, if we're just adding them in one by one, we're actually just adding them in all over the place. So I'll put that back in over here. And that should work a little bit better. Let's make sure that we remove this closing div. And I think that should be about it. So here is our work experience. Here are our skills. Here are our previous projects. And I suppose the only other thing we need now is some contact information. And this actually would probably look best at the very top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look if we've got some nice badges or something that we can apply to have notifications. And I actually like this one here as a button. So I'm going to copy this one over here. And since we're doing this near the header, I'm just going to copy paste this button straight in. We're going to remove the badge, and in here I'm going to do my email, which is hello@adriantuareg.com. And we're going to hit save on that, and we might turn this from a button to an A tag, which we'll pass in with a mail too. And this will just make sure that whenever anyone clicks on it, it'll automatically send them to an email. So let's refresh, and there is the contact email. Now I'm still not too sure about the design there for the button, so I might just reset it to a regular button, or maybe a button outline. Let's have a look if that's the class I'm looking for. I don't think that's the one. If we go to the button classes over here, we can take a look at some of the examples. And what we're actually looking for here is probably button outline primary. So let's actually update this one over here and hit save. And that way, if we have a look, we've got our button over here with a bit more priority, and that's looking pretty good. So that's the basic portfolio there with most of our content. The next thing we can do is maybe add a bit of a footer there. And usually in the footer, I like to repeat what I'm doing in the header. So that's usually the navigation, just so that if someone scrolls to the bottom of the page, they can continue to look at it. So I'm going to save that and paste that in. We will add a bit of margin. So I'm thinking margin on the y-axis of 5 units, and this will give it some room to breathe. So there it is below. Now that we've got all of this content in there, we can work on creating our next page, which is maybe our About Us page. So to create that, what we'll do is we'll create a brand new file here called about.html. And since we're reusing most of this content, I'm going to copy paste this all in. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove everything but the navigation and the lead text. So let's remove all of this. And we're going to set the active item here to About Us, and we're going to remove it from home. For the home, we're just going to do a /, but for the About Us, we're going to do /about.html. And we're going to apply a hashtag over here, but over here, we're going to link it properly in the top section. So that should get us up and running. Now, in terms of being on this page itself, we only need the / on the home, but on the index.html, on the actual menu here, we'll want to pass in the link. So let's do that here at the top and at the bottom. So let's give this a quick refresh. We'll go to About Us, and we can see that it's currently empty. And this is where we'll need to start to put some content in there. So let's go to the About Us section in here, and let's add a new container. Now for this, we want to create a H2 element. And for this H2 element, similar to what we had in our content previously, well, maybe a H3 element, we might copy that across. And here I would do something like About Adrian. We can pass in a p tag in here where we can write some more information about yourself. Now, I'm not going to write all of this. This is more of an example of what it could look like. We obviously do need to add a bit more margin here. So I'm going to add 5 units of margin for the top and maybe only 3 units of margin for the bottom. And here you could write a little bit more about yourself and your skills and some of the experience you've had. And you can fill these sections out bit by bit until you've got a full portfolio. But this is a quick example of how you can build a portfolio in Bootstrap 5. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit like, hit subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.